Hello and welcome to the Debrief, coming to you from the Washington Bureau of ABC News. I'm John Santucci. Thanks so much for joining us here on ABC News Live. Kimberly Brooks has the morning off, so you're stuck with me. We've got a lot of news this Monday morning. We're going to begin with the massive tornadoes overnight taking ravage down in Dallas, Texas. A live report from our team on the ground. Plus, President Trump, a rare change of pace for the president. He is now canceling his plans to host the G7 at Doral, his property down in Florida. We'll have more on that story. And lastly, Syria. We've been following the tense situation on the ground there. Our team is in the Middle East with a live report. But first, today's headlines.
Demonstrators tossed firebombs and vandalized businesses. They set barricades on fire and smashed up subway stations.
Police used tear gas and a water cannon, which sprayed protesters with a stinging blue-dyed liquid. Dozens were hurt and rushed to the hospital.
Duchess Meghan, in her own words, opening up to ITV's Tom Bradby about the struggle she faces from the press and the public while living in the spotlight.
When I first met my now husband, my friends were really happy because I was so happy, but my British friends said to me, I'm sure he's great, but you shouldn't do it because the British tabloids will destroy your life. And I very naively, I'm American, we don't have that there. What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. I'm not in tabloids. I didn't get it. So it's been complicated.
Prince Harry revealed the pressures he feels to shield his family from the same public glare his mother, Princess Diana, lived with over 2 decades ago.
I will always protect my family, and now I have a family to protect.
Harry also revealing the state of his relationship with brother Prince William amid rumors of a royal rift.
There's been a lot of talk in the press about rifts with your brother. How much of that is true?
Look, we're brothers. We'll always be brothers. We're certainly on different paths at the moment, but I will always be there for him, and as I know, he'll always be there for me. I love him dearly, and the majority of the stuff is created out of nothing. But it's just, as I said, as brothers, you have good days, you have bad days.
Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers had himself a monster game, throwing for 429 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also ran for a touchdown. Green Bay beat the Raiders 42-24.
Welcome back to the Debrief. We've got a lot to cover today. We're going to head down first to Texas. Those tornadoes overnight wreaking havoc all over Dallas. Just look at that video. Homes destroyed, cars toppled. A lot of schools also closed today in that region, and there are more bad weather and storms heading to that neck of the woods. Let's begin with ABC's Marcus Moore. He is on the ground, and he's been monitoring the situation there throughout the last several hours. Good morning, Marcus.
John, good morning. Good morning to you. It's really been an absolute mess here. This storm, the first tornado, came through at about 9 o'clock Central Time last night, and they are still trying to clear a path in some of the neighborhoods that have been cut off by fallen trees. And this is what we see here in this neighborhood in Richardson, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas to the north of Dallas. Took a direct hit from this one of the tornadoes that came through, and that vehicle you see back behind us, that belongs to our photographer, Juan Renteria, who's responsible for so many of the stories that we bring you here at ABC News. Well, he and his family had to take cover last night as this storm was hitting. A tree was on top of his vehicle, and here at his home, they actually ran into a closet inside the house to ride out this storm, John, and to hear Juan describe that is just absolutely incredible. It's frightening. And very quickly, I want to show you, his home sustained some bit of damage. You can't see the hole in the roof right now, but they were able to put a tarp over it to try to mitigate the damage because, the storm came through, ripped off the roof, and there was another storm after that dumped rain. And that actually, Juan is here right now. Juan, you have your mic on?
It's right here.
It's right here? Okay. Yeah, we're live on ABC News Live, and I wanted to, while we had you, first of all, I'm glad you're okay.
Thanks.
We cover this all the time, John, as you know, and Juan is one of the first guys there to help tell the story, but also the first one to jump in and help people who are picking up their lives. I've seen him so many times helping people whose homes have been destroyed, and now you find yourself, your home is still standing, thank goodness.
It is.
It did sustain some damage, and just kind of walk us through what you went through. You were with your wife and your teenage son last night when the storm hit.
That's right. Yeah. No, absolutely, Marcus. I mean, we heard the sirens go off. I came outside very quickly to see what was going on, and we can just see this light show of lightning and everything happening. So immediately, my wife and I, we know the drill already, and my son. So we put on our hard hats. We wore our construction gloves. We went into my daughter's closet, and we all just hungered down. My son was right behind me. My wife was in front of me. We all held each other's legs, and we just rode this out. And basically, we heard, it felt like the house shook. It felt, for us, it was the train sound that everyone describes. And you're absolutely right. I mean, in this business, I mean, we're always behind the camera, we're always on the other side, but this time it hit home. So we're just lucky to be alive.
And in that moment when you were with your wife, Debbie, and Diego, and your son, can you give us a sense of what was going through your mind at that point?
Well, when it was overhead, we could feel our ears popping.
So we pressure change.
Absolutely. So we knew it was close. And my wife was praying. I was just holding on. My son was beginning to freak out a little bit, but he did a really good job. So I'm really proud of him. But no, it was just a matter of just knowing that I think that we were all together. We felt like whatever happened, we were going to be together. And we just pulled through it. So we're very glad that, and as soon as it passed us, we came outside, and three of our vehicles one of our cars is still under the tree, under trees, and we're just, it's just an absolute mess. My neighbor's house is a mess. This is one of these neighborhoods that has matured trees, right?
Absolutely.
So because they're mature trees, there was a lot of just tree damage.
Yeah, a lot of tree damage, and I've also seen, Eddie, I don't know if you can show them in the back, they're way off in the distance. There's actually an entire roof that's been torn away. So not only, as you heard Juan describing the pressure change and John, the sound of the storm as it came through, you also had the trees falling and tree limbs flying through the air, along with the debris, that roofing that was ripped away and is so dangerous. It is, in fact, one of the most dangerous parts of any tornado or storm is the flying debris that can pierce windows and also walls. And then aside from that, you, John, have the power lines that fall down, and so many people are hurt or killed by fallen power lines because they are electrocuted. So they're dealing with, as you just heard Juan talk about, the trauma of this storm that blew through. Now just beginning the process of trying to pick all of this up. And John, I've got to tell you, it is going to be a long process. We're talking about homes that have been damaged, some of them destroyed, and also businesses. I don't know if you've been able to see the video, but there's a Home Depot that sits right along the 75 Central Expressway, major artery here in the Dallas area. It has been destroyed. So absolutely remarkable damage. And what is truly incredible about all of this, John, is despite all of the destruction we've seen, we've only heard about minor injuries and no fatalities here in Texas as a result of these storms. But in Arkansas, sadly, someone did pass away when a tree fell onto a structure there and someone was killed.
Really scary stuff, Marcus. And as you just noted with Juan, I mean, unbelievable what his family went through, but thank God they're okay. As you mentioned, he's a valuable member of our team. We're just glad he and his loved ones are safe this morning, and hopefully they'll have some time to take care of their home. I know we're going to help them with that as well. Marcus Moore, down in Dallas, Texas. Thank you, my friend. We appreciate it. As I mentioned at the top of the show, there is an unbelievable amount of weather coming into that region and a little beyond that. Let's turn to ABC's chief meteorologist, Ginger Z, who is watching the boards with us. Ginger.
John, I was so excited to hear you're doing the show today. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and start with the severe storm, shall we? Because you know that there have been tornadoes in not only Dallas, but also multiple warnings this morning around Memphis. You can see the video of that nocturnal tornado there taken from Rockwall, Texas. All around Dallas, you can hear the screams of what it felt like inside those terrifying moments of the tornado. Plenty of images of damage, so we know that this was a tornado. I think the National Weather Service from Fort Worth will get out early this morning and get some of the surveys done so we can know what type, but roofs gone and cars flipped. That's usually evidence of an EF2 or at least EF2, maybe even EF3. We'll see what they say. But we also can tell you for sure that this line has the potential to do this, not just in Tennessee and Mississippi, but today Alabama, parts of western Florida Panhandle, so Pensacola, Destin, New Orleans, all included in the severe storm forecast. And it doesn't stop there either, John. It goes to the east, and you're along that cold front, eastern North Carolina, Norfolk, Virginia, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and Columbia, all for tomorrow. And that's actually an earlier event, too. So this is the time of year we get that second severe storm season, especially through the south. So we're keeping an eye on all that. It's also the time where we see Interstate 80 starting to look like this, the slip and slide. And that's what was happening in Park City, Utah. A little messy there. More than messy on I-25 in Wyoming, where northbound lanes were closed for a time thanks to multiple accidents that were reported there. When that cold comes in and it settles in behind a cold front, we often end up seeing offshore winds in Southern California, and that will amp fire danger, and that's what was going on earlier today. Wanted to leave you with one last look at what can make that beautiful holiday look at Big Sky, Montana. Those chairlifts aren't operating quite yet, but they will be soon. John?
Ginger Z in New York. Thank you, Ginger. That got me excited. Something good to look forward to. We're going to switch gears. We're bringing you back down to Washington, where we are this morning, and going over to the White House, where President Trump, well, he's done something that we didn't think he'd do so quickly. Maybe he would have. We weren't sure. He has decided not to host the G7 at Trump National Doral. That is, of course, his mega complex down in Miami, Florida. My colleague, Karen Travers, our White House correspondent, joins us now. So, Karen, pretty rare for the president to ever undo himself, this quickly anyway. What happened that suddenly we saw the president say, maybe Doral wasn't such a good idea?
Yeah, but it was the best place to have the G7 summit last week when Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, announced it at the White House podium. This is a very rare reversal by the president to go back on a decision that he was very deeply involved in. Mulvaney told us that it was the president who first suggested Doral as the site of the G7, and the president signed off on this. John, he is blaming the do-nothing Democrats and the media for outrage over this decision, and he says it forced his hand. Now, of course, Democrats were raising alarm bells and complaints about this, so were ethics watchdog groups. But it was also Republican grumbling. There was some in public, and behind the scenes, Republicans saying this is just something they cannot defend the administration on. Mick Mulvaney yesterday went on Fox News and said the president still considers himself in the hospitality business. And that right there is a problem for Republicans to try and defend that. You even had Chris Christie, close ally of the president, but somebody who's not too shy with his criticism, say this was an unforced error and the administration had no choice but to change their mind on this.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to see where they end up hosting. Of course, they announced during that same press conference there were several runner-ups to host the G7. We'll see where that goes. Meantime, Karen, you mentioned that press conference by Mulvaney wasn't exactly his finest hour. He basically said as much yesterday during that Fox News interview, and he was asked about comments he made on Thursday regarding the growing impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Was there quid pro quo for President Zelensky to investigate Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and then receive a meeting with the president? Mulvaney said there was, then walked it back. Here's what he said on Sunday to Fox News.
You again said just a few seconds ago that I said there was a quid pro quo. Never use that language, because there is not a quid pro quo.
You were asked by Jonathan Karl, you've described a quid pro quo, and you said that happens all the time.
And reporters will use their language all the time. So my language never said quid pro quo. But let's get to the heart of the matter. Go back and look at that list of 3 things. What was I talking about? Things that it was legitimate for the president to do.
Yeah, and Karen, you and I were both watching that press conference. We know he said there was quid pro quo. But moving on, your daily project, Karen, you are the one that talks to radio stations crisscrossing this country. What are you hearing so far on impeachment?
A big question this morning was, why did Mick Mulvaney go on Fox News on Sunday only to dig himself perhaps more deeply into that hole? You heard Mulvaney say there he was misinterpreted and he never said quid pro quo. I mean, yes, it was John Carl who specifically said, to be clear, you are saying a quid pro quo, and Mulvaney says, yes, we do that all the time. The three reasons that you heard him cite there, that's to me the big thing here. Mulvaney is essentially saying he didn't say what he said on camera. Three reasons that the money was held up to Ukraine. The third is the most controversial. Mulvaney said last week the president wanted Ukraine to cooperate in an ongoing investigation into the Democrats, into the DNC server. He has since said he didn't say that. That's not one of the reasons. And that's something you're going to see Democrats jump on because, yeah, we've been talking about quid pro quo investigating the Bidens. This is another can of worms that Mulvaney opened up last week. And by going on the talk shows yesterday, that was the thing I kept hearing this morning, he made this worse in some ways.
We're going to see where this goes. Karen Travers over at the White House, thank you. We appreciate it. We're going to stick on the topic of impeachment because, we say this every week. It's a big week. It's a big week. This is a really big week. Let's bring in my colleague, Catherine Folders, right now. She watches Capitol Hill for us. Great to have you with us. This is a big week. Now, today's actually a little deceiving because there's not much happening up on Capitol Hill, but tomorrow, it's a big one.
Tomorrow it is. You're going to see more depositions this week. We've been seeing them for the past 2 weeks behind closed doors, but they will be talking to this diplomat named Bill Taylor. And the reason he's significant, you see him right there, and they're also going to have these people up here. Philip Reeker's still a little bit up in the air. Right. But the reason Bill Taylor is significant is because he was involved in those texting exchanges with other diplomats, specifically talking about this quid pro quo, withholding military aid in exchange for political investigations. Now, he's also significant because he's the one who raised concerns about this, about that something like this would be on the table. So tomorrow, behind closed doors, he will be there probably for about 10 hours or so, and they're really going to drill down and focus on the withholding of aid, and I'm sure they'll be talking about Mulvaney's statements as well.
And you mentioned Mulvaney there. There have been questions about the Office of Management and Budget, which Mulvaney, prior to becoming acting chief of staff, as you well know, was the director of. OMB, that was the group that actually held the money back from Ukraine. They were part of a wide-ranging subpoena that Capitol Hill sent over to the White House and some of these agencies. We learned just before air that OMB's responded.
Right. So OMB, they were asked for documents from the committee. They said, we're not going to give you those documents. Now, Michael Duffy, who works at OMB, has tweeted out that he's not going to show up for his deposition later this week. They're not going to talk to the committee. And they are significant to the committee in that they were on the front lines of this decision-making process, how that aid was held up, what exactly happened here, putting together the pieces of the puzzle as it involves that. And look, what will happen with this is the committee will just use this obstruction, as they call it, of their impeachment inquiry as one of the articles of impeachment.
Right. And just to know before we let you go, Catherine, you've been monitoring with the team who's cooperating, who's not. So far, minus the State Department, there's been no one, White House, world, other agencies, that is cooperating with Congress.
Right. And I think Congress expected this. You remember that 8-page letter that you and I poured over that the White House counsel's office sent to Nancy Pelosi and the other chairs, and they said, we don't think that you're doing this right. This system, you haven't had a floor vote. This isn't a formal impeachment inquiry. So guess what? We're not going to cooperate. So look, we're not going to see really any agencies turn over documents or witnesses come in.
We're going to watch it all. Catherine Folders, you and the team, thank you very much. You can get all of Catherine's latest reporting and our team up online right now at abcnews.com. We are going to switch gears and head overseas, though, because we are watching the tense situation in the Middle East, in Syria right now. We learned overnight that President Trump is considering keeping some forces in Syria right now. That is obviously a change from where the president has been for the last couple of days. Let's bring in our colleague, ABC News foreign correspondent James Longman, who is right there in the heart of the center. Where are you, James?
I'm in northern Iraq, so not quite in the heart of it. It's a little dangerous for us. We're thinking about going over, but just watching from Dahuk in northern Iraq at the moment, Tom.
And James, give me a sense right now, because as we reported overnight, the New York Times first to report that there have been questions about what the president would be doing with troops there on the ground. He's now saying, so we're hearing confirmed by Defense Secretary Esper, they may leave a couple hundred troops there in the zone right at the moment. What's the sense you're getting? Will that actually help the situation?
Well, I think there's been some confusion about this, because what was said was that the idea was to keep a couple of hundred troops in the region in order to kind of keep an eye on the oil. Now, in this part of Syria that we're talking about, the majority of the oil actually is much further south. So what is the suggestion here? That US troops would remain close to an oil field was actually on territory which the Syrian regime would claim, and having essentially abandoned the Kurds, that's how the Kurds would see it, or do see it at the moment, are the Americans therefore then asking the Kurds to come with them south to protect oil fields? The suggestion was that these oil fields are a source of income and revenue for extremist groups like ISIS, so that's a legitimate reason to want to protect them. But what authority would the Americans have to be able to continue doing that if they weren't continuing to support the Kurds further north? As for this ceasefire, well, I think it's been a ceasefire really in name only. It's the fighting really has continued over the last few days, although there has been signs of some success, because the SDF have decided to withdraw. They announced yesterday they are withdrawing or have withdrawn from Ras Al Ain, that strategically important town. So I think that in Washington will be read as a success of sorts. But John, we're heading for a much bigger issue here, because that US-Turkey brokered agreement that was made obviously between Mike Pence and the team and President Erdogan, it stipulated that the Kurds would withdraw from this area of northern Syria. But exactly where they would be withdrawing from, there is a big difference between what Turkey expects and what the Kurds expect. And the Kurdish commander told us they're only withdrawing from Ras Al Ain and a couple of other strategic places. They're not going to withdraw from this 200-plus mile stretch across northern Syria. And because of that, we're seeing real concern. The ceasefire is due to end tomorrow. Civilians are on the move because they know that the hostilities could kick up again.
We'll be watching it all. I know you and the team as well. Be safe, James Longman. Thank you very much. We're going to come back here domestically, and a tragic story we've been following out of Georgia. 3 soldiers were killed during a training exercise. ABC's Stephanie Ramos has more. She's at Fort Stewart with the latest. Hey, Stephanie.
Hi there, John. Officials say 3 soldiers died and 3 were injured when the Bradley fighting vehicle the group was riding in rolled over into water early Sunday morning here at Fort Stewart in Georgia. Officials say no other vehicles were involved, and it's still unclear if the vehicle was going over a bridge at the time of the accident. The commanding general of the 3rd Infantry Division says this is a heartbreaking day. We are extremely saddened by the loss of 3 dog-faced soldiers and injuries to 3 more. Our hearts and prayers go out to all the families affected by this tragedy. Now, all 6 soldiers are part of the 1st Armor Brigade combat team stationed here at Fort Stewart, and investigators will likely be taking a look at the terrain, fatigue, and the vehicle itself as possible factors into the deadly accident. John.
Stephanie Ramos in Fort Stewart. Thank you, Stephanie. We're going to switch gears. It was supposed to be the largest trial on opioids. It was supposed to get started actually today. It's not happening because they reached a settlement, reportedly $200 million. It is a landmark settlement. Obviously, a lot to dig into there. Let's bring in my colleague, Aaron Kotersky. He's in New York. So, Aaron, we were all set for this one to happen. What happened?
This was going to be the first federal opioids trial, John, and it was brought by 2 Ohio counties, Cuyahoga and Summit counties, and it was before a federal judge in northeastern Ohio who really urged the parties to try and reach a settlement. And in the early hours of the morning, just hours before opening statements were to begin, with the jury already chosen, they were able to reach a settlement with 4 of the 5 remaining defendants. And those defendants include 3 of the nation's largest drug distributors and Teva Pharmaceuticals, a large drug manufacturer. There's one holdout. It's Walgreens, the big pharmacy chain, but the judge put everything on hold and gave the parties 6 months to try and work it out with Walgreens.
So, Aaron, obviously, as you just said, this is the first one that was actually going to go towards trial. This is not the first case in its nature that we've heard of. How does this impact any of the ongoing cases that you and the team have been monitoring?
Yeah, I think it's a good point because this was to be the first, but it was only limited to these 2 Ohio counties. But because it's the first and because they were successful in reaching a settlement with most of the defendants now, it does lay the groundwork, people involved in the case say, to perhaps reach a settlement in all 2,300 opioids cases that have been filed in federal courts around the country. It is a staggering number of lawsuits. They involve states and cities and counties and individuals who are seeking redress from the harm that the opioids crisis has brought to the country, including hundreds of thousands of deaths and hundreds of billions of dollars in lost productivity.
Yeah, those numbers we were just showing our viewers on the screen, they're hard to swallow. Aaron Kotursky in New York, thank you, sir. We appreciate it. That is going to do it for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, you're stuck with me. I'm going to see you at 3:30 today for the briefing room for all of the latest political headlines here and around Washington. And also, don't forget to tune in to ABC's World News Tonight Prime. That is David Muir's team coming to you at 8 p.m. right here on ABC News Live. And for all the day's headlines, you want to make sure to download our ABC News app. You can find it on Apple, Android, wherever your heart desires. That's going to do it for all of us here at The Debrief. I'm John Santucci in Washington. You're watching ABC News.